The Blackwell Foundation Gala was the most exclusive event of the year. The wine flowed, the diamonds glittered, and at the center of it all was billionaire Adrian Blackwell and his flawless wife, Elena. But at 11:05 p.m., Elena Vance Blackwell walked towards the powder room and vanished. There was no note, no ransom demand, no witnesses. By 5:00 a.m., the first emails hit the press. By 9:00 a.m., Adrian Blackwell, a man who could buy countries, had lost everything. This isn't a story about a missing person. It's the story of a perfect plan. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender didn't just feel expensive. It felt rarefied, as if the oxygen itself was filtered through old money and ambition. Tonight, it was the Blackwell Foundation Gala, an event Adrian Blackwell hosted annually to remind the world of his power, disguised as philanthropy. Adrian, broad-shouldered in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, navigated the room like a shark, all teeth and charm. He was a new money titan, his company, Blackwell Global Holdings, having cornered the market on green tech venture capital. Beside him, his wife, Elena Vance Blackwell, was a vision in midnight blue silk. She was the old money Vassar graduate who gave his raw, brutalist ambition a veneer of class. "Adrian, darling," a congresswoman cooed, kissing the air near his cheek. "The work you're doing for ocean conservation, it's just saintly." "We all must do our part, Amelia," Adrian smiled, his hand resting on the small of Elena's back. Elena smiled, a flawless, practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. The hand on her back wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an anchor, a grip. She could feel the precise pressure of his thumb, a silent reminder to perform. "If you'll excuse me," Elena said, her voice a soft melody. "I must freshen up." Adrian's smile tightened for a nanosecond. "Of course, my love. Don't be long." He watched her walk away, her blue dress weaving through the constellations of New York's elite. He watched her until she turned the corner, a perfect picture of grace. Then he turned back to the congresswoman, his focus snapping back to the game. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Adrian was deep in a negotiation with a Swiss banker about a new acquisitions fund when he felt a small, unfamiliar flicker of annoyance. She was taking too long. It was rude. It was a slight to him. He excused himself and signaled to his head of security, a humorless man named Kincaid. "Find my wife. Tell her I'm waiting." Kincaid was back in 5 minutes, his face pale. "Sir, she's not in the ladies' lounge." Adrian's annoyance hardened. "Then where is she? Did she go to the car?" "We've checked the car, sir, and the coat check. Her wrap is still here." "What are you saying?" Adrian snapped, his voice a low growl. "Sir, the staff says no one has seen her leave the lounge, but she's not in there. We checked every stall. We even checked the adjoining staff corridors." A cold spike, different from anger, shot through Adrian. This was not annoyance. This was an inconvenience. A very public, very messy inconvenience. "Lock it down," Adrian commanded, pulling Kincaid into an alcove. "No one leaves. Tell the event staff it's a minor security protocol. A lost item. Do it quietly." "Sir, perhaps we should call the NYPD." "Absolutely not," Adrian hissed. "Do you know what the press would do with that? Hysterical billionaire reports missing wife? No, she's playing a game. She's emotional. She's probably had too much champagne. Find her. Now." But Eleanor was not emotional, and she hadn't had a single drop of champagne. At 11:05 p.m., Elena Vance Blackwell had indeed walked into the ladies' lounge. She bypassed the mirrors, entered the last stall, and lifted the toilet tank lid. Taped inside a waterproof bag was a simple, nondescript employee keycard, and a burner phone. She'd planted them there herself a week ago during a planning committee visit. She slipped out the stall, ignored the confused look from a woman reapplying lipstick, and walked directly to the staff-only door at the end of the hall. She swiped the card. The lock clicked open. She was in a grey, fluorescent-lit corridor. She kicked off her Manolo Blahniks, wincing at the cold concrete, and pulled a pair of simple flats from her clutch. She walked quickly, not running, down one hall, then another, following a route she had memorized from the blueprints. She emerged into a loading bay where a nondescript black sedan was waiting. The driver, a man with a scarred-up face and calm eyes, didn't speak. He simply opened the door. As the car pulled out onto a quiet side street, Elena took the burner phone from her clutch. It had one saved contact. She hit send on a pre-typed message. "Magnolia is blooming." Then she snapped the phone in half, threw it and the keycard into the car's built-in disposal chute, and watched the lights of the museum, the lights of her prison, fade into the rainy Manhattan night. By 1:30 a.m., Adrian's facade was cracking. The gala had been shut down, the guests sent home with confused whispers about a gas leak. Adrian was in a private office reserved for the museum director, the air thick with his fury. "What do you mean the cameras were looped?" he roared at Kincaid. "Sir, the feed for the corridor outside the lounge and the loading bay. It's been on a 20-minute loop for the last 3 hours. It's a professional job. We didn't detect it." "You're incompetent." Adrian threw a glass of water against a priceless Egyptian tapestry. "Get your digital team on it. Find out where the breach came from." This was when the door opened. It wasn't one of his men. It was a man in a rumpled trench coat, his face weary and his eyes missing no detail. "Adrian Blackwell?" the man asked. His voice was gravel. "Who the hell are you? This is a private—" "Detective Marcus Rylance, NYPD, 19th Precinct. We got an anonymous tip about a volatile situation and a possible hostage at this address. You care to tell me why you've locked down the Met and why your wife seems to be missing?" Adrian's blood ran cold. The police, the one thing he couldn't control. "Detective," Adrian said, forcing a calm, concerned tone. "My wife, she's unwell. We had a minor disagreement. She's prone to these episodes. She's likely just taken off to get my attention. This is a private, family matter." Rylance stared at Adrian. He didn't write anything down. He just looked, his gaze cataloguing the broken glass, the rage in Adrian's eyes, the $5,000 suit. "A family matter?" Rylance said. "Funny. The tip didn't sound like a family matter. It sounded like a woman who was terrified. Where is Elena Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell? I told you I don't know. She vanished. People don't vanish from the Temple of Dendor, Mr. Blackwell. Not without help. Or not unless they're running from something." Rylance's eyes flicked to Adrian. "Or someone. Are you accusing me?" Adrian's voice was ice. "Do you have any idea who I am? Right now, you're the husband. That's all you are." Rylance's own phone buzzed. He looked at it, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Well, this just got interesting. My anonymous tipper just sent me something else." He turned the phone to Adrian. It was a single, grainy image, clearly taken from a hidden camera. It was Adrian, in his own home office, standing over Elena. His hand was raised. Elena was cowering. The date stamp was from 3 weeks ago. "Like I said," Rylance said, putting his phone away. "A family matter. We're going to search the building. Properly." Adrian was speechless. The photo. It was impossible. His home was a fortress. No one could have— Kincaid burst back in, his phone in his hand, his face ashen. "Sir, you need to see this." Not now, Adrian barked. Sir, it's the market. The pre-market in Tokyo. Blackwell Global. It's down 40%. Sir, the servers. We're being locked out. Adrian snatched the phone. It wasn't just Tokyo. Hong Kong. Seoul. Anything tied to Blackwell Global was in free fall. A cascade of automated sell orders. What is this? Adrian whispered. We got an email, sir, Kincaid said, his voice trembling. To the General Counsel. From Eleanor's private server. It's a key. A decryption key. It's titled, For the Investigators. Adrian looked from the phone to Rylance, who was watching him with predatory stillness. The trap hadn't just been sprung. It was an entire field of landmines, and he'd been tap-dancing on them for years. Elena wasn't missing. She was gone, and she had just declared war. At 4:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 minute before the first pre-market bells in New York, the world ended. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with an email. An email sent simultaneously to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division, the Southern District of New York, and every major financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and Bloomberg. The email was from magnoliagroveproton.me. The subject line was simple, the Blackwell Global Holdings dossier. The body of the email contained only a link and a decryption key, the same key Kincaid had seen. At 5:00 a.m., the first analyst at a hedge fund clicked the link. At 5:01 a.m., the first journalist opened the file. At 5:02 a.m., the SEC's automated fraud detection system, triggered by a dozen identical reports, placed an immediate automated freeze on all trading of Blackwell Global, BGH, stock. But it was too late. The dossier was public. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a thermonuclear bomb of evidence, meticulously compiled over 3 years. There were the complete, unedited ledgers, not the clean ones Adrian showed his auditors, but the real ones. They showed Blackwell Global Holdings wasn't a green tech incubator. It was a front, a vast, impossibly complex Ponzi scheme. The Ocean Conservation Fund was a shell company in the Caymans. The solar wind technology was a patent for a space heater he'd bought and buried. He was using new investor money, from pension funds, from university endowments, from his friends at the Gala, to pay off old investors and fund his lavish billionaire lifestyle. But the ledgers were just the start. There were audio files, hours of them. Elena, it turned out, had a habit. Every time Adrian boasted in his study, every time he took a private call, a small, voice-activated recorder, hidden in the spine of a first-edition Great Gatsby, was listening. Audio file, Cayman Equity, transfer to MP3. Adrian's voice, smooth and arrogant. Of course it's a loss on paper. That's the point. We write off the loss. The foundation absorbs the tax credit, and we move the liquid assets to Geneva Capital Partners. They won't even know what to audit. Audio file. Senator Hajas Amelia, MP3. Adrian's voice, laughing. Amelia, darling. Saintly is what they call me. Just make sure that energy bill goes to the right subcommittee, and the donation to your re-election campaign will find its way. Yes, the usual account. There were photographs, bank statements, offshore wire transfer confirmations, a complete step-by-step guide to a $40 billion fraud. By 5:30 a.m., Adrian Blackwell was no longer a billionaire. He was a headline. By 6:00 a.m., the lights were on in the entire SDNY building. By 6:30 a.m., Detective Rylance, who had been sitting in his car outside Adrian's penthouse, Adrian was cooperating by not being allowed to leave, got a call from an assistant U.S. attorney. "Marcus," the AUSA said, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. Forget the missing persons case. We're on our way. We have a warrant for Adrian Blackwell. Full asset seizure. Bank accounts, property, cars, computers, everything. We're freezing everything." Rylance looked up at the glittering penthouse, a glass box in the sky. "Understood," Rylance said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "He's not going anywhere." Inside that penthouse, Adrian was watching the TV. His face was a mask of disbelief as CNBC, Bloomberg, and CNN all ran the same chyron. Blackwell Global implodes. SEC launches massive fraud probe. His phone, once the most powerful device in the city, was silent. No one was calling him. No one would call him. He was no longer a partner. He was a liability. He tried to log into his private bank. Access denied. He tried to call his lawyer. The call went to voicemail. His lawyer was probably already negotiating a plea deal for himself. He stared at a photo on the mantel. It was from their wedding. Elena, smiling, beautiful, and, he now realized, utterly lethal. "You bitch," he whispered. He didn't just lose his money. He didn't just lose his company. In the span of 6 hours, Elena had erased his entire existence. She hadn't just vanished. She had taken the entire world with her, leaving him alone in the burning ruins. And then, the heavy, authoritative knock came at his penthouse door. It wasn't Kincaid. It was the FBI. The morning of November 14th was a symphony of destruction, and Adrian Blackwell was the conductor, though he'd long since lost the baton. At 7 a.m., the FBI agents, led by a stone-faced woman from the white-collar crime unit, swarmed the penthouse. They were polite, professional, and utterly implacable. "Mr. Blackwell, you are to touch nothing," the agent in charge said. "This penthouse and everything in it is now property of the United States government, pending forfeiture." They were already putting evidence tags on his Renoir, on his laptop, on the very clothes in his closet. "My lawyer," Adrian started, his voice hoarse, "is welcome to meet you downtown," the agent replied, not looking up from a file. "You are being detained for questioning." He was led out in his $2,000 silk pajamas, a detail the paparazzi, miraculously tipped off, captured with predatory glee. The billionaire in his PJ's photo would be iconic. Meanwhile, Detective Rylance was at the 19th precinct, finally connecting the dots. The anonymous tip, the photo of the abuse, the perfectly timed data bomb. This wasn't a missing person. This was a witness who was now in mortal danger. "I don't care about the fraud case," Rylance bellowed at his captain. "The FBI has him on that. I have a missing woman, a woman who just torched a $40 billion criminal enterprise. Blackwell may be in cuffs, but he's not the only person who's going to want her dead. Every partner he implicated, every politician, every banker, they're all going to be hunting her." His desk was chaos. The photo of the abuse was real, but it was just the beginning. The anonymous tips had been coming for 6 months. Small things, a license plate, a meeting time, a name, James Thorne. "Who is James Thorne?" Rylance demanded of his team. A young tech analyst piped up. "Ran a search, boss. James Thorne, ex-SAS, hired by Blackwell 3 years ago as head of security, fired 1 year ago. Insubordination." He was Kincaid's predecessor, Rylance realized. "Find him. He's the key. He's Elena's ally." Across town, the dominoes fell. 7:30 a.m., the congresswoman, Amelia, released a statement that she was shocked and appalled and would be immediately returning all donations from Mr. Blackwell, as if that would wash her clean. 8:00 a.m. The board of directors of Blackwell Global Holdings, those who hadn't already been detained, voted unanimously to oust Adrian. It was a meaningless gesture. There was no company left to oust him from. 8:30 a.m. The Swiss banker Adrian had been schmoozing with at the Gala was arrested by Interpol at JFK, attempting to board a flight to Geneva. 9:00 a.m. The market opened. It was a bloodbath. BGH stock was delisted. Any company Blackwell had touched, Geneva Capital Partners, Cayman's Equity Fund, even the caterer for the Gala, was radioactive. Adrian, sitting in a stark, windowless interrogation room, watched none of this. He was alone, his hands shaking, the phantom itch of power already fading. A new man entered the room. Not Rylance, not the FBI. A man in an expensive, somber suit, an assistant U.S. attorney. "Mr. Blackwell," the AUSA said, sitting down. "My name is Thomas. We don't have much to talk about, really. The evidence is comprehensive. I want my lawyer," Adrian stammered. "He's busy," Thomas said, opening a file. "He's currently explaining to us why his last 3 retainer payments came from the fraudulent Ocean Conservation Fund. It seems you've made him a co-conspirator." Poor form. Adrian's face went white. "So, here's the reality," the AUSA continued, steepling his fingers. "Given the evidence, the audio, the ledgers, the wire transfers, you're facing roughly 180 years. Life. Multiple life sentences, in fact." Adrian couldn't breathe. "We are not offering a deal. We are offering a clarification. The only thing you have that is of any value to us is the location of Elena Vance Blackwell." Adrian's head snapped up. She did this," he spat. "She's the criminal. She stole from me. She's the prosecution's star witness, Mr. Blackwell, and right now she's in the wind, which means every person you screwed over, the Russian oligarchs you consulted for, the cartel money you cleaned in that bogus solar project. They're all looking for her. And so are we. We want her testimony. They want her silenced. Her life is in your hands, in a manner of speaking." The AUSA leaned in. "So, we know you're a monster. We know you're a thief. The only question left is, are you a murderer? Where did you hide your wife, Adrian?" The irony was so thick, Adrian almost choked. They thought he did this. They thought he was in control. He looked at the AUSA, a desperate, feral cunning entering his eyes. They thought she was just a witness. They thought she was running. He knew his wife. Elena didn't run. She conquered. And he knew something else. He knew her one weakness, the one thing she loved more than she hated him, the one person she was protecting. "I don't know where she is," Adrian said. And for the first time, he sounded utterly truthful. "But I know where she's going. Elena Vance Blackwell was not in a 5-star hotel. She was not on a private jet to a non-extradition country. She was in a small, clean, 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, overlooking the rumble of the N train. The apartment was rented under the name Jane Smith and was paid for in cash 6 months in advance. This was her command center, and this was her story. It hadn't started with a plan. It had started with a bruise, a small blue-violet mark on her upper arm, hidden by a Chanel sleeve. It had been 2 years into the marriage. He'd been angry about a bad trade, and she'd distracted him with a question about dinner. The back of his hand had been so fast, she'd thought she'd imagined it. But the bruise was real, and so was the cold, clarifying click in her head. She wasn't a victim. She was a Vance. Her great-grandfather had built a shipping empire, and her grandmother had saved it from a hostile takeover. She'd been raised on stories of strategy, not fairy tales. She had married Adrian for love, a foolish, naive love. But she would survive him with strategy. She started small. She noted his moods. She learned his passcodes, not by asking, but by watching the reflective surface of the A nearby painting as he typed. The first time she accessed his private server, she was looking for evidence of an affair. Instead, she found the Cayman Equity Fund .ledger. She didn't understand it at first, but she was smart. She double-majored in art history and economics. She spent a year cross-referencing, learning, and documenting. She realized with dawning horror that she wasn't married to a ruthless businessman. She was married to a criminal. The violence got worse. It was always private. A shove, a grip on her wrist that left marks, a whispered threat at a party. "Smile, Elena, or I will break you." She knew she couldn't just leave. He had judges on his payroll. He would claim she was unstable. He would paint her as a gold digger. He would find her, and he would end her. The golden cage was a real cage, unless she burned it to the ground. That's when she found James Thorne. Or rather, he found her. He'd been Adrian's head of security, an ex-MI6 operative who'd seen too much in the world. Adrian hired him for his reputation. Adrian fired him when James physically stepped between Adrian and Eleanor during one of his rages. "The woman is my wife, Thorne. You work for me," Adrian had roared. "I don't work for monsters," James had replied, and he was gone by morning. Eleanor found him a week later, working as a bouncer at a dive bar. She walked in, sat down, and said, "I have a proposal." For 1 year they planned. James, with his expertise in surveillance and counter-surveillance, taught her everything. How to use a burner, how to spot a tail, how to plant a listening device, how to loop a camera feed. He was the how, she was the why. The Magnolia Grove on the email address. It was the name of the street her grandmother had lived on, the one who had taught her to never play a man's game, darling. Invent your own and make them play it. The Gala was the perfect exit. The one night all his allies and enemies would be in one room. The one night his security would be focused on external threats, not internal. Now, in the Queen's apartment, Elena watched the same news reports as Adrian. But her reaction was different. There was no joy, no triumph, just the quiet, grim finality of a task completed. James Thorne, the man with the scarred face, was with her. He'd been her driver. "It's done, Elena," he said, handing her a cup of tea. "He's in custody. The feds have him." "He's in custody," Elena said, her gaze distant. "But he's not stopped. He's a cornered animal, James. That's when he's most dangerous. He won't be thinking about the money now. He'll be thinking about me. This apartment is secure. In 24 hours we'll have you on a plane to Zurich. You'll give your testimony to the Swiss authorities via video link. You'll be safe." Elena shook her head. "No, he won't look for me. He'll look for my leverage. He'll look for my sister." James froze. "Your sister?" "Catherine. She's in a private facility. He can't get to her." "He can't," Elena said, her eyes flashing with the first real fear James had ever seen in her. "But he knows I will always go to her. She's the one good, clean thing in my life. He used to threaten to cut her funding every time I defied him." Catherine Vance, the forgotten sister. She had been in a state of advanced, early-onset multiple sclerosis for years, living in a world-class private care facility in upstate New York. A facility paid for, in full, by Elena's trust fund, a fund Adrian had never been able to touch. "He thinks I'm running," Elena said, standing up. "He thinks I'm a victim. He's wrong. But he's also right about one thing. I'll never let him get near her. He's going to use his one phone call, not to his lawyer, but to one of his other associates, the ones the FBI doesn't know about. He's going to send them after Catherine to draw me out." "Elena, that's speculation," James said, grabbing his own coat. "It's not. It's strategy, Elena replied, her face hardening. I know my opponent. The feds have his money, but I have his playbook. Get the car. We're not going to Zurich. We're going to White Plains. Adrian Blackwell sat in the interrogation room. The AUSA was gone. He was alone. But he was thinking. He was right. They'd given him his one phone call. He hadn't called his lawyer. He'd called a number he knew by heart, a number for a man who didn't exist, who ran a consulting firm that specialized in problems. It's me, Adrian had whispered into the receiver. The contract is active. Magnolia. No, not her. The sister. White Plains. Bring her to me. No, just get her. Make it loud. I need the wife to hear it. He hung up, a small, twisted smile on his face. He'd lost his queen, but he still had one pawn, and he was going to use it to force a stalemate. Meanwhile, Rylance's squad room was electric. "Boss, I found Thorne!" the tech analyst yelled. "He's not just an ex-bouncer. He's been operating a high-end private security firm under a shell. Thorne Protective. And guess who his only client is?" "Let me guess," Rylance said, grabbing his coat. "A Jane Smith at a private care facility in White Plains, paying the bills for a Catherine Vance, Elena's sister. He's been her private security detail for a year." "He's not her security," Rylance said, his blood turning to ice. "He's the facility's security. He's been protecting the sister. That's Eleanor's bolt hole. That's her weakness." "And boss," the analyst said, "it gets worse. We just got a ping from Blackwell's holding cell. The AUSA let him make his one call. The number he called, it's flagged by Homeland Security, tied to a Sergei Volkov, a known fixer for the Russian mob, the crew Adrian was laundering money for." Rylance was already in the elevator. "Get me a chopper," he yelled, "and get me SWAT. We're not the only ones going to White Plains." The race was on. 3 forces were now converging on the quiet, sterile Oakwood Meadows Care Facility. 1, Elena and James, driving a nondescript Volvo, breaking every speed limit on the Taconic Parkway. James was on the phone, coordinating with his small, on-site security team. "This is not a drill. Level 5. Move her. Move her now." 2, Rylance and the NYPD. A chopper was thundering its way north, carrying Rylance and a tactical team. They knew what this was, a kidnapping in progress, designed to silence a federal witness. 3, Volkov's men. 2 black SUVs, filled with men who looked like they were carved from concrete, were already turning into the facility's long, winding driveway. They weren't there to be quiet. They were there to make a point. The first shots were fired by the time Eleanor and James screeched to a halt at the front entrance. "They're here!" James yelled, pulling his own weapon. "Get to the safe room. I'll find Catherine." "I'm not leaving her!" Eleanor screamed, running into the building as the front glass doors shattered from gunfire. Alarms were blaring. Orderlies were screaming. Eleanor knew the way. She'd been here every week for 5 years. She sprinted down the hall, past 2 of Volkov's men, who were being pinned down by James's security. She burst into Catherine's room. It was empty. The bed was turned over. The window was shattered. A cold, primal fear, far worse than anything Adrian had ever made her feel, seized her. "Catherine!" She heard a groan from the bathroom. She ran in. Her sister, a frail, tiny woman, was huddled in the tub, a young orderly on top of her, shielding her with his own body. He'd been shot in the shoulder. He's in the hall," the orderly gasped. Elena turned. One of Volkov's men stood in the doorway, a massive, bearded man. He smiled, raising his gun. "The boss says hello," he grunted. "No!" Elena screamed, shielding her sister. A shot echoed. But it wasn't the man's. He just looked confused. Then a red dot appeared on his chest. Then another. Then a volley of sound as Detective Rylance and the SWAT team, having entered from the roof, came down the hallway. NYPD! Get down! Get down! The man was cut down in a hail of gunfire. Elena was breathing, hyperventilating. James ran in, followed by Rylance. "Mrs. Blackwell," Rylance said, his gun still raised. Elena stood up, her blue gala dress from the night before, now stained with plaster dust and the orderly's blood. "Detective," she said, her voice shaking but her eyes like steel. "Thank you for coming." But they were not here for her. They were here for me. Rylance looked at the frail woman in the tub, then at the strong, terrifyingly composed woman in front of him. He finally understood. "I think," Rylance said, lowering his gun, "you and I need to have a long talk. And I think you're going to want to be in the room when we finally charge your husband." The interrogation room was different this time. Adrian was no longer the man in pajamas. He was in an orange jumpsuit, his hair matted, his bravado gone. The door opened. In walked the AUSA, Detective Rylance, and Elena. She was in a simple black pantsuit, her hair pulled back. She looked less like a victim and more like a CEO. Adrian flinched, as if she were a ghost. "Hello, Adrian," she said. Her voice was calm. "Elena, you're alive," he stammered. "No thanks to you," she replied. "The men you sent, they killed a security guard. They shot a 19-year-old orderly, all to get to my sister. I didn't..." Adrian looked at the AUSA, then at Rylance. I was desperate. They're my family. I wanted my family." Elena laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made Adrian shrink. "Family? You don't have a family. You have assets. You have liabilities. And when I stopped being an asset, you tried to turn me into a problem. And when that failed, you went after my sister." "This is not a good look, Mr. Blackwell," the AUSA said dryly. "Attempted kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder. We're adding those to the 180-year list. Your fixer, Mr. Volkov, is also in custody. He's very chatty, very eager to tell us all about your money laundering operations in exchange for a deal." Adrian's face crumpled. He was truly, finally, at the end. He had no more moves. "Why?" he whispered, looking only at Eleanor. "Why did you do this?" "We had everything." Elena stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back. Rylance tensed, but she was perfectly still. "You're wrong. You had everything." "I had a cage," she said. "I had bruises. I had a husband who told me to smile after he threatened to pull the plug on my sister's care." She leaned in, her voice dropping so only he could hear it. "You think this was about the money? You think it was about your affairs? You were a bad investment, Adrian. And I'm a Vance. We cut our losses." She straightened up, turning to the AUSA. "I'm ready to give my full statement." "Elena, please!" Adrian cried, his voice cracking. He was on his feet, reaching for her. "Don't do this. I love you. I can fix this. We can start over." Rylance put a hand on Adrian's chest, shoving him back into his seat. "Sit down, Blackwell. It's over." Adrian looked at Elena's back as she walked out the door. He didn't see his wife. He saw the architect of his doom. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a master of the universe. He was just a man in a room who had lost everything because he had underestimated the one person who saw him for exactly what he was. As the door clicked shut, Adrian Blackwell finally, truly, broke. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. Not for his victims, not for his wife, but for himself. The 6 weeks that followed the firefight in White Plains were not a return to normalcy, but the creation of an entirely new one. The world, it turned out, moved on from a $40 billion implosion with staggering speed. The headlines about Adrian Blackwell, The billionaire in his PJs had been replaced by a new political scandal and a new celebrity divorce. But for those in the blast radius, the work was just beginning. Elena Vance found that the silence of her new, heavily secured life was louder than any of Adrian's rages. She had moved from a Queen's safe house to a rented brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a home chosen by James Thorne for its discreet exits and reinforced walls. It was elegant, but it was, in its own way, another beautiful, temporary cage. The legal machine, however, was not silent. It was a grinder. Her first meeting was not with the press, but with the victims. The AUSA, Thomas, had requested it. He'd called it an informal preliminary victim impact assessment. Elena knew what it was. It was a test. She sat at a long, polished table in a conference room at the Southern District office. James stood by the door, impassive. Across from her sat Thomas and 3 people who represented the little guys Adrian had eviscerated. Among them was a man named Robert Henderson, the comptroller for a retired teachers' union in Ohio. His face was a mask of grief and fury. "With all due respect, Miss Vance," Henderson began, his voice shaking with a quiet, repressed rage. "AUSA Thomas here tells us you're the hero of this story. He tells us you're the star witness." "I am the star witness, Mr. Henderson. I don't know about hero," Elena replied, her voice even. "I find that hard to believe," Henderson shot back, slapping a file on the table. "I have a list here, a list of 54 teachers, retired, people who taught for 40 years. Their pensions, my pension, were invested in Blackwell Global's Green Future Fund. It's gone, all of it. $50 million. Gone." He leaned forward, his eyes red-rimmed. "And while you were gathering your evidence, you were at the Met Gala. You were wearing a dress that cost more than my house. You were living on our money. So you'll have to forgive me if I don't see a hero. I see an accomplice who got a better deal." The accusation hung in the sterile air. Thomas started to interject. "Mr. Henderson, that's not—" "No," Elena said, raising a hand. She looked directly at Henderson, not with pity, but with a cold, clear-eyed acknowledgement. He's right to ask. She took a breath. "Mr. Henderson, I cannot and will not defend the life I lived. I was a fool. I married a man I thought was brilliant and powerful. I mistook his ambition for genius. I was wrong." "A mistake," Henderson scoffed. "A $50 million mistake." "I was his prisoner, Robert," Elena said, her voice dropping, losing its boardroom polish and gaining a chilling intimacy. "You see the gala dress. You didn't see the bruises he covered with foundation before we walked in. You see the penthouse. You don't see the audio files I recorded from inside a locked study, terrified he would hear the click. You see an accomplice. You don't see a woman who spent a year learning to loop security footage and pick a lock just to get to a phone he didn't know about." She slid a single photograph across the table. It was the one Rylance had received, the one James had managed to take through a window. Adrian, his hand raised, his face contorted in rage. Elena, cowering. Henderson stared at it. His fury seemed to deflate, replaced by a hollow sickness. "He held my sister's life in his hands," Elena continued. "She is severely disabled, in private care. He paid the bills, and every time I questioned him, every time I disappointed him, he would smile and ask if Catherine's facility was still up to standard. He was going to pull the plug, Mr. Henderson. That was my reality." She pulled the photo back. "I was not gathering evidence to be a hero. I was gathering a weapon to survive. I was building a bomb, and I was sitting on the detonator, praying he wouldn't find it. I am sorry, more than I can ever express, for what his actions did to your union. but I am not his accomplice. I am the woman who brought him down." There was a long silence. Henderson slumped back in his chair. The fight gone. "So what now, Miss Vance? What good does any of that do? He's in prison. Our money is— where? In the Cayman Islands? In his art collection?" "It's gone," Elena said simply. "He burned it. He spent it. The planes, the cars, the art. It's all leveraged, all fraudulent. The government will seize it, but it's pennies on the dollar. The money," she said, looking at Thomas, "is gone." "Then we are ruined," Henderson whispered. "You are not," Elena said. "Adrian's money is gone, but mine is not." This, Thomas knew, was the real meeting. "I am a Vance," Elena said. "My great-grandmother's trust fund was set up in 1948. It was ironclad, structured so that no spouse could ever touch it. Adrian, to his eternal frustration, could never get his hands on a single cent. It's my money, and I am going to use all of it to make this right." Henderson looked up, confused. What do you mean?" "I am liquidating the entire Vance portfolio," Elena stated, as if discussing the weather. "The stocks, the bonds, the real estate. It's not as much as he stole, not even close. But it's a start. I am creating a restitution fund. Its sole purpose will be to pay back the victims, the real victims, the pension funds, the university endowments, the small investors, not the hedge funds, not the oligarchs, the people like you." "Why?" Henderson asked, his voice raw. "It's not your fault. You just said so." "It's not my fault," Elena agreed. "But it is my responsibility. I am the only one who can. I will not spend the rest of my life living on money that I have, while people like you have nothing, all because I happen to share a last name with that monster. I will not be the billionaire's widow. I will be the one who cleaned up his mess." 2 months later, she made it public. The press conference was held in a community center in the Bronx, a place that smelled of floor wax and instant coffee. It was a calculated move, no marble, no chandeliers, just linoleum floors and fluorescent lights. Elena walked to the podium, flanked by James. The room was a sea of flashing cameras. She looked out and saw them all: the Wall Street Journal, the Times, a hungry-looking tabloid reporter from the Post. And in the back, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, was Detective Marcus Rylance, attending on his day off. "Good morning," Elena began, her voice clear and unamplified by the weak microphone. "For 10 years my name was Elena Blackwell. It was a name synonymous with wealth, with access, and, as we now know, with a catastrophic criminal fraud." She paused, letting the cameras click. "Today I am here as Elena Vance. My name, my money, and my choice." She laid out the plan. The Magnolia Grove Fund. "It is named for the street my grandmother lived on," she explained. "A woman who taught me that you cannot build a legacy on a rotten foundation. Adrian Blackwell's foundation was pure rot. And now, it's my job to help clear the rubble." She announced that the entirety of the Vance family trust, valued at just under $800 million, was being transferred to the fund. It was a fraction of the $40 billion Adrian had vaporized, but to the Hendersons of the world, it was a lifeline. "This fund is not charity," she said, her eyes finding the journal reporter. "It is restitution. It is not an apology. It is an action. We cannot make everyone whole, but we can begin." She opened the floor to questions. They came like bullets. "Miss Vance!" shouted the Post reporter. "Is it true you're just doing this to avoid prosecution yourself? How much did you really know?" "I am the prosecution's star witness," Elena said, her voice turning to ice. "My testimony, and the evidence I gathered at extreme personal risk, is the entire case. The AUSA's office has my full cooperation. Next, what about Adrian Blackwell from the Times? Will you be at his sentencing? Adrian Blackwell has pled guilty to 45 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and thanks to his actions in White Plains, conspiracy to commit kidnapping and murder. He will be in prison for the rest of his natural life. I do not need to attend his sentencing. I am his sentencing. Another reporter, a young woman from a financial blog, raised her hand. Ms. Vance, what do you say to the women who saw you as a style icon, as a fantasy? What do you say to them now? Elena's expression softened for a fraction of a second. I would say, stop looking for fantasies. The fantasy life you saw was a performance. It was a lie. I was a prisoner in a couture gown. The only style worth aspiring to is freedom. The only fantasy worth having is your own agency. Don't be an icon, be an architect. She signaled to James. Thank you. She walked off the stage, ignoring the chaos of shouted questions. Rylance met her by the exit, a small, appreciative nod on his face. Hell of a speech, Miss Vance, he said. It was the truth, Detective, Elena replied. Heard the sentencing came down this morning just before you went on, Rylance said, keeping his voice low. The plea was accepted. 180 years. No parole. He's being transferred to ADX Florence. Elena stopped, her hand on the door. ADX Florence. The Alcatraz of the Rockies. A supermax prison. A concrete box where he would live 23 hours a day in total isolation. He'll hate the lack of amenities, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He tried one last play, Rylance added. Filed a motion claiming you were the mastermind, that you controlled him, that he was afraid of you, and this was all an elaborate plot to steal his company. Elena turned to him, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. And was he wrong, Detective? Rylance held her gaze. He saw the woman from the Gala, the woman in the safe house, the woman who had faced down a Russian hitman. He was an amateur, Rylance said. He was playing checkers and he didn't realize you were playing chess. His biggest mistake was thinking he was the only player on the board. Thank you, Marcus, Elena said, using his first name. For everything. For holding the door. Any time, Elena, he replied. You're free and clear. She walked out into the bright, noisy Bronx afternoon. Free. It was such a small word for such a heavy thing. That evening she did not celebrate. She went to the White Plains facility. The bullet holes were plastered over. The glass was replaced. A new state-of-the-art security system, paid for by the Magnolia Grove Fund's administrative budget, was fully operational. She sat by her sister's bed. Catherine was asleep, her breathing shallow. The young orderly who had protected her was in the room, his arm in a sling, reading a magazine. He'd refused to transfer, saying he wouldn't leave Miss Vance. Elena watched her sister. This was the why. This was the whole reason. This frail, vulnerable woman was the only family she had left, the only person in the world who had never wanted anything from her but her time. Adrian had threatened the one clean, good thing in her life. He hadn't just been a thief. He'd been a heretic. Catherine's eyes fluttered open, sensing her. You're on TV, Catherine whispered, her voice a dry rustle. You look tired. I am, Elena smiled, smoothing her sister's hair. But I'm done. He's gone. The monster. He's gone forever. He can never, ever hurt you again, Cat. I promise. Good, Catherine sighed, a look of profound peace on her face. Now, you can paint again. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't spoken of painting in 10 years. It was the part of her she'd buried first. Adrian had called it a cute hobby, something to keep her busy while he did real work. She left the facility hours later and drove back to her brownstone. The sun was setting over the East River. She walked into her apartment, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a canvas. In the spare room, which James had intended as a home gym, a large object was draped in a painter's cloth. She had moved it from storage. She pulled back the sheet. It was a painting she had started a decade ago, the week before she'd met Adrian, an abstract, full of dark, turbulent blues and angry greys. She had been a promising, fiery artist. She had been Elena Vance. She stared at the canvas, at the 10 years of dust and silence it represented. She thought of Adrian in his concrete box. She thought of Robert Henderson getting his first restitution check. She thought of Catherine sleeping safely. She walked to her old, dust-covered art supplies. She picked up a brush. Her old life had been about vanishing, about being the perfect, invisible wife. Her escape had been an act of erasure, wiping Adrian off the map. But this was different. She dipped the brush into a tube of brilliant, bright cadmium yellow, a color of violent, unapologetic sunshine. She touched it to the canvas, right in the heart of the darkness. She wasn't a billionaire's wife. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't an avenger. She was just Elena. And for the first time in a very long time, she was no longer vanishing. She was appearing, and she alone, was holding the brush. They say losing everything is a tragedy, but for Elena Vance, losing everything was the first step to gaining her freedom. She vanished from a gala, but she reappeared as herself. Adrian Blackwell's power was built on a lie, and one woman's courage was all it took to tear it all down. It's a reminder that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the one who's been listening. What did you think of Elena's plan? Was it justice or was it revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more drama and twists, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Thanks for listening.